people don't look their age, especially this guest coming in. I Google searched. I was like, what? Say what now? All right. She's the executive director of the Minority Cannabis Business Association. She's an attorney. She's also a world-class bodybuilder. Let me welcome Amber Littlejohn. Hello. Hi.
Hello. Hello. You went digging back into the archives for that job before my job.
Yes, I did. You know, because we are not just our titles, right? You're here to talk about cannabis, which we're gonna chop it up, and hopefully you can spend some time with us because I want to talk to you about a bunch of stuff. But I want to start with the bodybuilding because you know it is, to me, it speaks to something like how do you get into that? You know, Shavar and I were talking both on mic and off mic about our journeys physically, you know, doing things, getting in shape. But you went extreme. That's an extreme thing that you did.
Yeah, I think it speaks to my temperament a little bit, that I don't just ever get into something. I've got to go to the other level. But how I got into it was actually obsessively working out after a breakup, because I think it really can't be understated how important, you know, physical activity and exercise and some sort of like intensive physical activity is for your mental health. And so, you know, I've got my daddy's genetics. So about 6 months into it, I was like, oh, what's this? And people started taking note. And so I just started setting goal after goal. And first I was going to be professional, and then I was going to do the Miss Olympia, and then I was going to try and win it. And so it just started, you know, snowballing. I kind of did the same thing when it came to law school. People were like, what are you going to do after this bodybuilding and fitness career? Well, I'm going to go into the supplement industry. Well, then I owned a company, and then I went to law school, and now I became an advocate. So I have a tendency to go hard when I do things. And
why not? Why just be mediocre? Why not go hard when you can? Why not?
So I picked a great career because I became a lawyer, and you got to go hard to do that. Then I came to DC and decided I wanted to fight for small businesses, and you've got to go hard to do that. So as folks get to know me, it starts to make a little more sense that there's this bodybuilding, and then there's this, because it takes this certain amount of obsessive work ethic to be successful in both places.
I feel like we have been duped in this world, and I'm going to say it as many times as I can because I know there are young people listening. Oh, they're a jack of all trades, master of none. And I always say, as Africans, we are all of the things. All of the things are epigenetically in our DNA. The ability to be able to work very hard with our hands, with our mind. There's hand in mind. They call it hand-eye coordination. That's your brain. You know, being able to play basketball well is a brain activity. It's not just about your physicality, because the most physical aren't always the best players. It's the people that understand how to put it all together and then build a team. So I absolutely get your bodybuilding and your advocacy and your legal career, because we are holistic beings, and it's the energy that you apply to whatever it is that manifests your success. So I get it. And I wish more of us would tap into the things that give us joy and bring us passion and all of that, and apply it across the board instead of us putting ourselves in these tiny boxes. Okay. Cannabis right now. And I'll say this, I said it on Friday, I'll say it again. I wish that no one listening ever uses cannabis or cocaine or mushrooms or anything. I want everyone to be of sober mind, period. That said, be grown and sexy and do whatever you want to do with your body and your life. That said, those of you who are in that business, I want you to make as much money as you possibly can and be as successful as you possibly can. Cannabis not being federally legal. Why do you think that is, Amber? Because it seems illogical to me, Amber Littlejohn is here, that it is federally illegal today.
It is federally illegal because the United States couldn't constitutionally put Black people and war resistors in jail. So they had to find a way to criminalize that behavior. And I want to make it really clear, that is not my conjecture. That is not my opinion. That is the explicit statements of the architects of cannabis prohibition in its latest form that emerged in the 70s, in the Nixon era. They have admitted that's exactly why they did it. And so It is illegal because they wanted to put Black people and hippies in jail.
Okay. Why is it still illegal when roughly more than half of the states have some, I think it's almost 80% of the states have either medical or recreationally made cannabis usage legal now across this country? Why is it still illegal in 2022?
It is still illegal for the same reasons that we are still fighting for fundamental rights as Black people in this country. It is still illegal because we have so intrinsically tied cannabis to racism and fear and criminality around Black people and Mexicans that we will continue to have these unjust federal laws. Laws where even when cannabis proves to be less of a harm and less of a threat, the laws that exist around cannabis are more stringent than tobacco or alcohol.
Are you optimistic? Amber Littlejohn is here, Shavar Jeffries, who's also an attorney, that will change? Because our president could, by executive order, make it legal tomorrow. Are you optimistic that that will happen in his administration?
No, I'm not. I'm not optimistic about that. Biden really echoes sentiments that we actually see in a lot of the older Black and Latino, in the Black and Latino elders within our community, which is their personal trauma informs their views on cannabis and substance use. And so it is very hard for him to make decisions about cannabis when so much trauma around substances exists in his past. So I don't see him personally making some big sweeping reforms through his administration or utilizing that authority to create those reforms. I am hopeful that he can at least put in place some changes that help get people out of prison, help people to keep from getting rearrested, help protect small legal businesses that are trying to find a way in this space. But in terms of sweeping reform, either through the administration or Congress, I am not particularly optimistic in the short term.
Amber, I'm curious, what do we need to do in those states where cannabis has been legalized to make sure that Black entrepreneurs get at minimum a fair share of the upside on the revenue side, right? Because we obviously, as you described, we were the primary victims of the ways in which cannabis prohibition fueled mass incarceration. Now that there's legal money to be made in this space, I know in my state of New Jersey, there's been issues in terms of Black entrepreneurs having access to the licenses to be a cannabis dispensary. What do we need to do to make sure that people of color, Black people in particular, have equity in terms of the legal sale of cannabis-related products?
Well, these efforts actually need to start before legalization even rolls out, before medical even starts, because what's happening is we are building these medical markets. That's kind of the foot in the door. And those medical markets are controlled by a handful of large non-minority owned multi-state operators. And then they advocate for the transition into adult use, but then they serve as the cornerstone of that industry. And so even when there are efforts like there were in Illinois, extensive efforts to provide funding, special licensing priorities, those medical operators getting a head start on the adult use market actually created a natural monopoly. And so years later, all of those social equity licenses and the funding attached to it are tied up in litigation and tied up in funding issues and tied up in minor, legislative challenges that are perpetuated by folks that really want to continue to protect these small markets. So the work actually has to start before legalization, because as we know, when we look at so many different types of initiatives that involve equity, they say, oh, let us just get this done and we'll carve out the equity piece later. We'll take care of you on the back end. And what we are not seeing is any of that happening. We are seeing folks continuing to take advantage of their first mover advantage and use it to shut people out of the industry.
As if that hasn't been the blueprint. How things get done in this country. Go ahead, Shavar.
I was going to say, so for those, because you're clearly on point in terms of making sure equity and better yet, justice is built on the front end. What can we do in states like New Jersey and other states where the front end work was not done? And to Karen's point, it's almost never done to build in equity from the beginning. So what can we do now to try to, if not turn it around, at least mitigate the inequities, built into how this is operating moving forward?
It's really important to stay together once the market rolls out, because what we're seeing is that when these big markets roll out, everybody that was working together as a community and pushing is now breaking and scrambling to really fight for their existence and to fight for their space in the industry. But it requires that we stay together, or at least find places to come together to fight. For example, in New Jersey, one of the issues is that the municipalities are sort of shopping for the best bargain. So in a lot of states, the counties or the cities have the ability to opt out of a legal cannabis program. And so the counties that are doing that oftentimes are shopping for a better opportunity, meaning, we want a big guy to come in and give us these revenues and these jobs, and not necessarily prioritizing equity. So a good example of something to happen in New Jersey is folks coming together to really educate and push the municipalities to say, hey, listen, this is how you do it. This is how you do it equitably. And we're going to hold you to that. And if you don't, then we are going to take all of our grandmas and our aunties and our folks who you rely on as your voting bloc, and we're going to have something to say about this. Because while those elders may not support, cannabis in general, the idea that you can come into a community and start exploiting it and exploiting past harms done to people for personal profit, I think is generally offensive to people.
Now, is that the state legislature?
So the issue I was speaking about in New Jersey is municipal. But that absolutely applies to the state legislature. There are issues that happen after the fact. For example, Massachusetts has a great, social equity centered delivery model. But the problem is the way that the model is set up, it can actually never really be profitable or sustainable because the amount of staff. So for each delivery, you'd have to have 2 people manning the delivery with these armored trucks. And so there's never any way to do, maybe a secured, bicycle delivery or a single person delivery. So finding ways to go back into the policy and make it sustainable. And I think the reason we end up with unsustainable policy is that when it comes to issues of economic justice, politicians tend to listen to the most glossy. Economic justice isn't as sexy for a lot of politicians. Right. Criminal justice, it just doesn't roll off the tongue. And so when it comes to creating these programs, they listen to criminal justice reform. Mind you, that is absolutely an integral part of this industry and this discussion. And then they also listen to big corporate interests. Who they are not listening to are small businesses, small minority businesses, to actually talk to us about what it is we need, how we can be a part of this, the challenges that we face. Instead, we get that paternalism that tends to come even, we'll say, equally from the left, that progressive paternalism where, great, thanks, I'm glad you feel that you need that, but I'm going to tell you what you need. So we get a lot of that. So it's about really kind of coming together and telling folks, this is what we need to economically restore our communities.
Amber Littlejohn is here. You can follow her at A Littlejohn Esq for Esquire, or MIN Cannabis Association, or ASSOC for, of course, Minority Cannabis Business Association, of which she's the executive director. As you're talking, we've had Wanda James on, and of course, Dr. Shonda Macias, and we just had a couple of weeks ago to hear Johnson, who just got his dispensary license in New Jersey. Tucky Blunt is family. He's family. And again, this to me is as big a civil rights issue in our community as anything else. It's not up there with voting rights, but it is huge because so many of us, our whole communities were decimated because of the way in which they criminalized us. And it was a plan during the Nixon administration to demonize Black people through the use of flooding our communities with drugs. And Reagan doubled down and said, hold my beer, with crack cocaine. But this has to liberate expunge records. It has to do all of that and provide wealth for people in the community. And the fact that you said that armored cars, I'm thinking, how much more dangerous is cannabis than alcohol? And the only reason why you need the armored cars is because cannabis is illegal federally, and people have to keep large sums of cash in their businesses, which wouldn't happen if they could do everything electronically, federally, and bank properly. How do we get around that?
Yeah, I mean, well, this is kind of the predicament that we're in right now, and it unfortunately is impacting small and minority-owned businesses more because of the federal illegality. We are looking at effective tax rates of 70 to 90% sometimes.
Say what? Wait, hold up. Time out. Somebody that paid six figures in taxes this year. Say that again. How much? What? 70%?
70 to 90% for many small businesses. The cannabis industry still, if you followed history and
wait, pause, Amber. I'm sorry. The federal government can tax you 70, 90% for something that is not legal federally.
Yes. If you remember that, Al Capone, how he got put out of business was well, not officially, not the end all, but how he was finally put in jail was tax evasion. And there are statutes that say, even if you are engaging in criminal activity, you still have to pay taxes. And so the federal government—
that's what I'm like, the hypocrisy of this country, it is not sustainable. There's just too many pieces of hypocrisy for it to hold up. This doesn't make any sense.
So you have to pay taxes, but then you are going to have to pay taxes at the rate as if you were engaging in criminal activity at the federal level. And so these are extraordinary rates, and there are no write-offs. I mean, there's like none of the things that allow you to very limited write-offs. And so this is easier for larger companies to navigate because they can create these complex corporate structures, but it is devastating to small businesses. So then that money can't go into security. It can't go into, payroll, any of the things that really help these businesses sustain. And then you're right, because there's very limited access to banking. I have members that have to drive 2.5 hours to go deposit their cash in the bank. That's round trip. So they get done for the day and have to take their cash in. And so it becomes really challenging. It becomes challenging to pay your employees. It becomes challenging for your employees that work for you to get insurance, a car, a house. All of those things become really, an additional way to continue to penalize us. And this is far more impactful in small businesses that aren't these big multi-state conglomerates that can actually operate multiple entities within an entity to protect their investors and employees.